Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Interesting comments that came out over the last couple hours or so involving Kentucky head football coach Mark Stoops. Now, listen, if you listen to this show, you know I have an immense amount of respect for Mark Stoops. Nobody's perfect, whatever, we get it. But at the same time, this is a guy that is by far, in my lifetime, the best football coach that Kentucky has ever had. Now, some people might be old enough to remember the Bear Bryant days. I am not one of them. I have some gray hairs coming in, but not enough to remember Bear Bryant. And so I simply bring it up to just say, like, immense amount of respect for what Mark Stoops has built at Kentucky, a place that obviously historically just hasn't been a lot of winning that has gone on. At the same time, though, he has seemingly said a lot of things about NIL over the last couple years that I think kind of give you the impression that he ain't really happy with the state of the game. We obviously all remember that moment in time. Remember, of course, they lost to Georgia. Remember, if you remember, like Kentucky started, I think 5-0 or 6-0 last year. They destroyed Florida at home, and they played Georgia the next week. And I think everybody kind of thought like, oh, maybe this is the year that Kentucky keeps things close. Instead, Mark Stoops and Kentucky go out there and get their brains beat in by Georgia. And so I know it'd be easy. Well, you know, it's Georgia. It's okay. It happens. But it was after that game that Mark Stoops kind of went to the podium, or it was a day or two after. I think it was on his coach's show. But he was asked, like, how do we close the gap with Georgia? And he said, well, you want to close the gap with Georgia? They're paying players. We got to raise some money, do the same. And so those comments at the time were a little bit like, I don't know if he should have said that, but is it really that far out of bounds? Well, I bring it up because over the last day or so, Mark Stoops has done another interview where he's complaining about NIL, and I got to be honest, I'm a little bit over Mark Stoops and his whining about NIL. So let's get into it. Let's hear what he had to say about NIL. This was in an interview with Daryl Bird from Cat's Paws of 24/7. Kentucky Sports Radio kind of transcribed a lot of it, so, you know, whatever. But I bring it up because this is what he had to say. He said, I have 100 free agents every 6 months. You don't think there's pressure of raising money to keep them and to pay them what they deserve and to help them out? And I've done this for 2 or 3 years completely alone. I get no help, none. I feel very isolated, very alone. I'll be honest, I don't know how long I can take dealing with what I've dealt with myself personally. I can only do so much. I've never had this kind of stress and pressure. Not great, but he kept going. I can't coach the way I want to coach because all I do is raise money or try to raise money. I have to go meet somebody for a drink or meet somebody for a dinner or do something to raise money 3/4 of the time. It's just reality. You go through all the frustration and even panic. How do I raise money? I feel very isolated on how to do it. But if I don't raise the money, it doesn't get done. And so let's get into those quotes because, again, we talked about it with Lincoln Riley a minute ago. I think two things in this case can be absolutely true. I do think it's a new world, a new sport. College sports is changing right in front of our eyes. I am also so over these coaches whining about NIL and raising money. And so let's go ahead and dive in because I just look at this Mark Stoops thing from two different perspectives. On the one hand, like, I get it. And especially Mark Stoops. Remember, Mark Stoops is the son of a high school football coach, okay? So Mark Stoops grew up, it was all about football, 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 football. And I guarantee you, Mark Stoops did not get into this job to become a millionaire. He just didn't. He came in to teach football, be around football, be in a locker room, help young kids. And that's a very noble gesture. That's a great thing. That there's nothing to criticize there. But it's also worth noting, there's a lot, and by the way, let me say this. There's a lot of guys from kind of that older-ish generation, probably 50s and above, mid-50s and above, that feel the same way, that didn't get in to just raise money, didn't get into pay players, didn't get into this world of college sports where it's all about salaries and NIL and collectives and this and that. I get it. It's why we've lost a lot of great coaches in the last, 5 years. It's why Coach K is out of college basketball. It's why Nick Saban's out of college football. It's why Jay Wright retired. It's why Roy Williams retired. And so I get it. I get that this is a frustrating element of the job that wasn't there even 5 or 6 years ago. Now, you had to raise money, but not like this. At the same time, though, like I said, Mark Stoops, I'm kind of over. You got to stop whining, my man. Because here's the bottom line. Mark Stoops, even if he, and I know he did, even if he got into college coaching for all the right reasons, teaching kids, impacting lives, all that stuff. Okay, that's great. But at the same time, no matter why you got in, even if you didn't get into it to make millions, you are making millions right now. You're making close to $9 million a year to coach major college football. And part of the job description now, in your opinion, maybe most of the job description, is to raise money. That is part of the job. And that's where I have zero sympathy. Every single person in America, every single person around the world, there are elements of their job that they don't love. We get it. Nobody has a perfect job. But at the same time, there aren't a lot of people that are making $9 million a year to deal with the crap that they don't want to. And so from my perspective, this is now part of the job. You got to do it. You got to quit whining. Every coach in America is dealing with it. And if you don't want to deal with it, don't take the $9 million. One, I said this last year when he complained about Georgia. If Mark Stoops agreed to take a salary cut of $9 million to $5 million, still a pretty good salary, I'd say. I'm pretty sure that while it's not totally legal to just put that money in the collective, there are ways that some of the money that is used for his salary could go to the collective. So don't tell me that your job is so terrible and it's so tough, because it could be so much worse. And that's why I just don't have very much sympathy for this guy, because at the end of the day, everybody deals with something. And this is part of being a coach in 2024. I would also add this. Didn't love this part of the quote either. He said, where did he say it? I want to make sure I have this right. He said, I've done this 2 or 3 years completely alone. I get no help, none. I'm just going to be honest. I do not like that quote at all. And let me tell you why. It is because if you remember, what was it, 2 summers ago? Remember that whole basketball school, football school, John Calipari versus Mark Stoops thing? And John Calipari was essentially complaining about the same thing. He basically wanted funding for a basketball practice facility. And I didn't love him going public with it either. But at that time, when the football coach and the basketball coach were publicly fighting over money, you know who had your back? Your AD. Remember, Mitch Barnhart had Mark Stoops' back. Mitch Barnhart went to a press conference with Mark Stoops. Kentucky basketball was in the Bahamas, and Mitch Barnhart put a gag order on John Calipari and said, do not speak about this until I give you permission. And John Calipari kind of had to apologize to put his tail between his legs. So to say that you've had no help, even if that's true, even if that's accurate, I don't love the idea of throwing Mitch Barnhart under the bus there, because that's kind of what you did. And I know Mitch Barnhart, if you ask Kentucky fans, they've been critical of he's been behind in NIL, but I just don't know that I love him doing that. Lastly, the only other real thought that I have on this is that what does stand out to me about this particular quote, the part at the end where he did say, he said something like, let's see here, where is it? I've done this for 2 or 3 years. I get no help. I feel very isolated, very alone. I'll be honest. I don't know how long I can keep dealing with what I've dealt with. You know what my first thought was with that? You know who should feel really good right now? Texas A&M fans. Because Texas A&M, like, they can pretend. Mark Stoops can pretend. That was pretty close to getting done. So imagine if Texas A&M got a coach who's basically admitted, I don't want to do the things that are necessary in this world of college sports. Now, you could argue maybe he would have a little bit more help at Texas A&M, but at the exact same time, it is also worth noting that even if he had a little bit more NIL help at Texas A&M, it doesn't change the fact that he would still have to do some of this on his own. And so when I look at those comments, when I look at what he said, one, I'm just curious from the perspective of Kentucky is how much time does he really have left? Because the SEC is getting tougher. I think part of why he wanted that Texas A&M job was because he knew how much tougher the Kentucky job was going to get. But at the same time, I also just wonder, how much longer does he want to do it? He clearly does not like this new world of college sports. And so because of it, I'm just fascinated to see how much longer he is willing to put up with this.